The blood-stained letter trembled in Tabitha Palmer's hands as she stood in the dim church rectory, knowing that by sunrise every soul in Green River, Wyoming, would know what her father had done. It was the spring of 1878, and the mountain air still carried the chill of winter when Tabitha discovered the ledgers hidden beneath the loose floorboard in her father's study. Reverend Edmund Palmer had been the spiritual shepherd of Green River for 12 years, a man whose sermons about righteousness and moral fortitude echoed through the wooden church every Sunday. But the numbers in those ledgers told a different story, one of embezzled church funds, of money meant for the widows and orphans diverted into gambling debts and whiskey. The final entry, dated 3 days ago, detailed his plan to flee before the church elders discovered his crimes. He had left in the night without even a goodbye to his only daughter. Tabitha was 22 years old, and in the span of a single evening, she had watched her entire world collapse. The respect she had carried as the minister's daughter, the modest social standing that had protected her, the carefully planned future that included marriage to Samuel Hutchins, the banker's son, all of it disintegrated like morning frost under a harsh sun. Samuel's mother had already sent word that the engagement was terminated. The landlord had given her 3 days to vacate the small house adjacent to the church. And the whispers had begun, cruel and cutting, suggesting that surely the daughter must have known, must have been complicit in her father's theft. She had not known. The realization of her father's betrayal cut deeper than any of the town's accusations. He had looked her in the eye every morning, had blessed their meals with prayers she now understood were hollow, had counseled her on virtue while stealing from the very congregation that trusted him. Tabitha stood alone in that rectory, surrounded by the remnants of a life built on lies, and made her decision. She could not stay in Green River. Whether or not the town believed in her innocence, their judgment had already been passed. She was the disgraced minister's daughter, and that mark would follow her through every street, every store, every Sunday service for the rest of her life. With trembling hands, she packed what little belonged to her. 2 dresses, one dark blue and practical, one faded calico that had been her mother's, a worn Bible that predated her father's corruption, a photograph of her mother who had died when Tabitha was 12, before everything had gone wrong. She took nothing that the church could claim as recompense for her father's crimes. The small savings she had kept hidden in a tin box, money earned from sewing and mending for the townspeople, barely amounted to $20, but it was honest money, and it was all she had. Before dawn broke on that cold April morning, Tabitha Palmer walked out of Green River with nothing but a carpet bag and the clothes on her back. She did not look back at the church steeple rising against the pale sky, did not allow herself to think about the friends who would turn their faces away, the Sunday school children she had taught who would be instructed to forget her name. She walked south along the dusty road, following the Green River as it wound through the valley, with no destination in mind beyond a way. The first 3 days were the hardest. Tabitha had never been more than 5 miles from Green River in her entire life. The vastness of the Wyoming territory stretched before her, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Sagebrush and wild grass covered the rolling hills, and in the distance, the Wind River Mountains rose like ancient sentinels. She slept under the stars the first night, huddled beneath a cottonwood tree, every sound in the darkness making her heart race. She had read about wolves and bears, about outlaws who preyed on travelers, about all the dangers that waited beyond the safety of town walls. But she could not go back. She rationed the bread and cheese she had brought, walking until her feet blistered and bled inside her boots. When she reached the small settlement of Farson on the third day, she used some of her precious money to buy passage on a freight wagon heading south toward the mining camps. The driver, a grizzled man named Charlie who smelled of tobacco and leather, asked no questions when he saw her exhausted face. She rode in the back among crates of supplies, grateful for the rest even as the wagon jolted over the rough trail. "Where you headed, miss?" Charlie finally asked as they made camp that evening beside a narrow creek. "Anywhere there's work," Tabitha replied, warming her hands over the small fire. "Anywhere I can start fresh." Charlie studied her thoughtfully as he chewed his dinner. "You running from something or toward something?" "Does it matter? Suppose not." He poked at the fire with a stick. "Mining camp at South Pass City might have use for a woman who can cook or clean. They are always needing help at the boarding houses. Pay is decent if you do not mind the rough company." Tabitha nodded, though the thought of a mining camp filled her with trepidation. She had heard stories of such places, lawless and crude, where violence erupted as quickly as the mountain storms. But she needed work, needed a place where no one knew the name Palmer or cared about the sins of a disgraced minister. They reached South Pass City 5 days after Tabitha had fled Green River. The camp sprawled across the hillside in a haphazard collection of rough wooden buildings, tents, and mining operations that scarred the earth. Men covered in dust and grime moved between the diggings and the saloons, their voices carrying on the wind. Tabitha felt small and exposed as Charlie's wagon rolled down the main street, aware of the stares that followed her. Respectable women were scarce in mining camps, and her arrival generated immediate interest. "You want my advice," Charlie said as he helped her down from the wagon. "You go see Mrs. Henderson at the Mountain View boarding house. She is tough but fair, and she does not tolerate nonsense from the miners. Tell her Charlie Watkins sent you." Tabitha thanked him and made her way to the boarding house, a 2-story structure that looked slightly more permanent than most of the buildings around it. Mrs. Henderson turned out to be a stout woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. She looked Tabitha up and down with the assessing gaze of someone who had seen every kind of trouble the frontier could produce. "You got experience keeping house?" Mrs. Henderson asked bluntly. "Yes, madam. I have been managing a household since I was 12 years old. I can cook, clean, mend, and do laundry." "You running from a husband?" "No, madam, I have never been married." "Family, then?" It was not a question. Mrs. Henderson's expression softened slightly. "Well, I will not pry. Lord knows everyone out here is running from something. I need help with the cooking and cleaning. I have got 12 miners boarding here regular, plus I serve meals to another 20 or so. Work starts at 4 in the morning and does not stop until after supper is cleared. I will give you room and board plus $15 a month. You keep to yourself. Do not encourage any of the men and we will get along fine." It was not much, but it was more than Tabitha had any right to hope for. She accepted immediately, and Mrs. Henderson showed her to a tiny room on the 2nd floor, barely large enough for a narrow bed and a washstand, but it had a door that locked and a window that looked out toward the mountains. It was hers. The work was backbreaking. Tabitha rose before dawn to help prepare breakfast for hungry men who worked the mines from sunup to sundown. She scrubbed floors, hauled water, changed linens, and cooked meals for crowds that never seemed satisfied. Her hands, which had been soft from a life of comparative ease, grew rough and calloused. But the physical exhaustion was almost welcome because it left her too tired to dwell on everything she had lost. The miners treated her with a rough courtesy, and if they were curious about her past, They respected the unspoken rule of the frontier that you did not ask questions a person was not willing to answer. 6 weeks passed in this manner. Tabitha began to think that perhaps she could build something resembling a life in South Pass City. It was not the future she had imagined, but it was honest work, and slowly the wound of her father's betrayal began to scar over if not heal. Then Nathan Quentin rode into town. She first saw him on a Tuesday morning in early June as she was hanging laundry in the yard behind the boarding house. He rode a big roan gelding and led a pack horse loaded with supplies, his silhouette framed against the bright morning sky. Even from a distance, there was something different about him. He sat his horse with the easy confidence of a man who had spent his life in the saddle, but there was no swagger in it, none of the aggressive posturing she had come to associate with the miners and drifters who passed through camp. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of beard shadowing his jaw. When he dismounted in front of the general store, his movements were economical and purposeful. Tabitha found herself watching him longer than was proper, then shook her head and returned to her work. South Pass City saw dozens of men pass through every week. There was no reason to take particular notice of this one. But that evening, when the dinner crowd filled Mrs. Henderson's dining room, Nathan Quentin was among them. He took a seat at the far end of the long table, nodding politely to the other men but not joining in their boisterous conversation. Tabitha served platters of roast beef and potatoes, moving efficiently through the cramped space, and when she placed a plate before him, he looked up and met her eyes. "Thank you, miss." His voice was quiet, but there was something in it that made her pause. His eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds over the mountains, and when he looked at her, really looked at her, she had the unsettling feeling that he saw more than she wanted to reveal. "You are welcome," she managed, then moved on to serve the other diners. Throughout the meal, she was aware of his presence in a way that unnerved her. He ate without hurry, listening to the conversation around him but contributing little. Once, when one of the miners made a crude joke that brought raucous laughter from his companions, Nathan's expression tightened with what looked like disapproval, and Tabitha felt an unexpected flush of gratitude. After dinner, as she cleared the tables, Mrs. Henderson pulled her aside. "That fellow at the end, the one with the roan horse, he is looking to rent a room for a spell. Said he has got business in the area that will take a month or two. You make sure his room is ready, the one next to yours upstairs." Tabitha's heart gave an odd little jump, though she could not have said why. "Yes, madam." She prepared the room carefully, putting fresh linens on the bed, filling the water pitcher, making sure the lamp had oil. When Nathan came upstairs carrying his saddlebags, she was just finishing. "Your room is ready, mister." She realized she did not know his name, Quentin, Nathan Quentin. He set his bags down and looked around the small room with what seemed like satisfaction. "This is fine. More than fine, actually. I have slept in far worse places. If you need anything, you can let Mrs. Henderson know." She started to leave, but his voice stopped her. "I did not catch your name." She hesitated. For 6 weeks, she had been careful to keep her distance from the men who boarded here, to remain polite but reserved. Giving her name felt like opening a door she had been determined to keep closed, but there was nothing threatening in his manner, only a simple courtesy that seemed increasingly rare. "Tabitha," she said finally. "Tabitha Palmer." Something flickered in his expression, gone too quickly for her to interpret. "It is nice to meet you, Miss Palmer. I expect I will be seeing you around." Over the following days, Tabitha found her carefully constructed routine disrupted by Nathan Quentin's presence. Unlike the miners who left early and returned late, Nathan's schedule was irregular. Sometimes he rode out before dawn and was gone all day. Other times, he spent hours in his room, and she could hear the scratch of pen on paper through the thin walls. He was unfailingly polite, always thanking her for meals, once helping her carry heavy buckets of water when he found her struggling in the yard. But he did not pry, did not ask the personal questions that she dreaded, seemed content with the comfortable distance of cordial strangers. She learned more about him from the conversations he had with the other boarders. He was a ranch hand, or had been, working on various spreads across Wyoming and Montana. He was looking to buy land of his own, scouting potential properties in the area. He was 26 years old, originally from somewhere back east, though he did not specify where. The miners seemed to respect him in a way they did not respect each other, perhaps because of the quiet confidence he carried, or perhaps because on the two occasions when arguments threatened to turn violent in the boarding house, Nathan had stepped in with a calm authority that diffused the situations before Mrs. Henderson had to fetch the marshal. Tabitha told herself she was not particularly interested in Nathan Quentin. She had not come to South Pass City looking for complications, especially not the kind that came in the form of a gray-eyed cowboy with a gentle manner and secrets in his past. She had enough of her own secrets to manage, but 3 weeks after Nathan's arrival, everything changed. It was a Saturday, and the boarding house was busier than usual. Tabitha had been up since before dawn, helping Mrs. Henderson prepare for the increased crowd. By late afternoon, she was exhausted and desperately in need of fresh air. Mrs. Henderson had sent her to the general store to purchase more flour and sugar, and Tabitha was making her way back along the dusty Main Street when she heard a voice that froze the blood in her veins. "Well, I will be damned, if it is not Tabitha Palmer." She turned slowly, her arms full of parcels, and found herself face to face with Robert Carson, a man who had attended her father's church in Green River. He was a prospector who had always made her uncomfortable with the way his eyes lingered too long, his smiles too familiar. Seeing him here felt like a nightmare made real. "Mr. Carson," she said, keeping her voice steady with effort, "so this is where you ended up." He stepped closer, and she could smell whiskey on his breath despite the early hour. "I heard you ran off after your daddy stole all that money. Folks back in Green River have been wondering what happened to you. I have nothing to say about my father's actions. Now, if you will excuse me, I need to get back to work." She tried to move past him, but he grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in painfully through her sleeve. "Not so fast. You know, there is a lot of folks back home who think you were in on it. Reverend's daughter, keeping his books, seems mighty convenient that you did not notice all that money disappearing." "I had nothing to do with it," Tabitha said, her voice shaking now despite her best efforts. "Let go of me. Maybe I believe you, maybe I do not." His grip tightened. "But I am thinking a girl in your position should be real nice to folks who could make her life difficult. Real nice." Before Tabitha could respond, before she could even process the threat implicit in his words, Robert Carson suddenly released her arm and stumbled backward. Nathan Quentin had appeared as if from nowhere, one hand gripping the back of Carson's collar, his expression thunderous. "The lady asked you to let her go," Nathan said, his voice dangerously quiet. Carson sputtered, trying to regain his balance. "This is none of your business, friend." "I am making it my business." Nathan released him but stayed between Carson and Tabitha. "You are going to apologize to Miss Palmer, and then you are going to walk away." "Like hell I will. Do you know who she is? Do you know what her father did?" "I do not care if her father was Jesse James himself. You do not put your hands on a woman like that. Now apologize." Something in Nathan's stance, in the coiled readiness of his posture, must have convinced Carson that pushing further would be unwise. He muttered something that might have been an apology, shot Tabitha a venomous look, and stalked away toward one of the saloons. Tabitha realized she was shaking, the parcels in her arms trembling. Nathan turned to her, his expression softening immediately from anger to concern. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" "I am fine," she managed, though tears were prickling at the corners of her eyes. "Thank you. I should get back." She hurried away before he could see her cry, before the carefully constructed walls she had built around her emotions could crumble completely. But when she reached the boarding house, Nathan was right behind her. "Miss Palmer, please wait." She stopped on the back steps, still clutching her packages, unable to look at him. "You must have questions now. Everyone always does." "I have only one question." His voice was gentle. Would it help to talk about it? And somehow, that simple offer of understanding where she had expected judgment broke through her defenses. The tears she had been holding back spilled over, and the whole sordid story came tumbling out. Her father's betrayal, the embezzled funds, the shame that had driven her from Green River, the constant fear that someone would discover her past and condemn her for sins that were not her own. Nathan listened without interruption, his gray eyes never leaving her face, and when she finally fell silent, exhausted from the confession, he did something she did not expect. He took the parcels from her arms, set them carefully aside, and pulled her into an embrace. It was not romantic or presumptuous, just the solid comfort of another human being offering shelter in a storm. Tabitha allowed herself to lean against him for just a moment, drawing strength from his steadiness, and then she stepped back, wiping at her eyes. "I am sorry. I should not have burdened you with all of that." "You did not burden me," Nathan said firmly, "and for what it is worth, I do not believe you had anything to do with what your father did. I have been watching you for 3 weeks, Miss Palmer. I have seen how hard you work, how honest you are, how kind you are to people who do not always deserve it. Whatever your father's sins, they are not yours to carry." She looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of insincerity, but found only earnest conviction. "You cannot know that. You barely know me." "I know enough." He hesitated, then continued. "My father was a drunk who beat my mother until she could not stand anymore. I was 14 when I left home, and for years I was terrified that his violence lived in me, that I would turn into him. It took me a long time to understand that we are not doomed to repeat our parents' mistakes. We get to choose who we become." The raw honesty in his words created an unexpected connection between them, a recognition of shared pain and hard-won survival. Tabitha felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the tight knot of shame and fear she had been carrying. "Thank you," she said softly, "for understanding, for not judging." "Nothing to thank me for." Nathan picked up her parcels and handed them to her with a small smile. "Though I would appreciate it if you would stop calling me Mr. Quentin. Nathan is fine. Only if you stop calling me Miss Palmer. Tabitha is fine." His smile widened, transforming his face from merely handsome to something that made her heart skip. "Deal." After that day, something changed between them. It was nothing dramatic, no grand declarations or improper advances, just a quiet deepening of connection. Nathan began finding excuses to be wherever Tabitha was working, carrying water buckets without being asked, helping to clear tables after meals, sitting on the back steps in the evening while she took a few moments of rest, and talking about anything and everything. He told her about the ranches he had worked, about learning to rope and ride from a Shoshone man who had taken pity on a runaway boy, about the land he hoped to buy, a valley about 15 miles north of South Pass City with good water and grazing. Tabitha found herself sharing things she had never told anyone, Her love of reading despite having few books, her dream of teaching school someday, her mother's gentle kindness, and how much she still missed her. With Nathan, she did not have to pretend to be anyone other than who she was. The daughter of a disgraced minister, a woman trying to build something from nothing, someone who had been broken but was slowly healing. Mrs. Henderson noticed, of course. Nothing happened in her boarding house without her knowledge. One evening, as Tabitha was washing dishes, the older woman came into the kitchen and fixed her with a knowing look. "That Quentin fellow has taken a shine to you." Tabitha felt her cheeks heat. "We are just friends." Hum. Mrs. Henderson did not sound convinced. "You be careful, girl. He seems decent enough, but men can surprise you." "I am being careful," Tabitha assured her, though she was not entirely sure that was true. Despite her best intentions, she was beginning to care for Nathan in a way that terrified her. After everything that had happened, she had not thought herself capable of trust, especially not trust in a man. But Nathan was different. He was patient with her silences, respectful of her boundaries, and most importantly, he saw her. Not the minister's daughter or the scandal or the shame, just Tabitha. 2 days later, Nathan asked if she would like to go riding with him on her afternoon off. "I want to show you the valley," he explained as they stood in the boarding house yard. "The land I am hoping to buy. I would value your opinion." Mrs. Henderson gave permission with a stern warning to be back before dark, and Tabitha found herself sitting in front of Nathan on his roan gelding, acutely aware of his arm around her waist to keep her steady. They rode north out of the mining camp, following a trail that wound through stands of pine and aspen. The day was clear and warm, with wildflowers dotting the meadows in brilliant splashes of color. As they left the scarred landscape of the mining operations behind, the country opened up into something pristine and beautiful. The valley Nathan showed her took her breath away. It stretched between 2 ridges of pine-covered hills, with a creek running through the center that sparkled in the sunlight. The grass grew thick and green, and she could see deer grazing in the distance. It was peaceful in a way that South Pass City could never be, a place that felt untouched by the harsh realities of human greed and ambition. "It is beautiful," Tabitha said as Nathan helped her down from the horse. "Truly beautiful." "I thought so too." He stood beside her, surveying the valley with evident satisfaction. "The owner is an old rancher who is moving back east to live with his daughter. He is asking a fair price, and I have almost enough saved. By fall, this could be mine. You will build a ranch here. That is the plan. Start with cattle, maybe some horses. Build a house, barn, corrals. It will be hard work, but it will be mine, a place that cannot be taken away." She heard the echo of her own longing in his words, the need for something permanent and secure after too much instability. Without thinking, she reached for his hand and his fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. "You deserve that," she said. "A place of your own, a fresh start." He looked down at their joined hands, then up at her face, and the expression in his gray eyes made her pulse quicken. "So do you, Tabitha. You deserve a place where you are not running, where you are not afraid. I do not know if that place exists for me. Maybe it does." He lifted his free hand and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch feather light. "Maybe it could be here." Her breath caught. She knew what he was offering, could feel the weight of possibility hovering in the air between them. But fear still held her back, fear that she was not worthy, that her past would poison anything good that tried to grow. "Nathan, I cannot ask you to take on my burdens. The scandal, the shame, it follows me. That man Carson, he is not the only one who knows. Eventually, others will find out and it will reflect on you." "I do not care what other people think," Nathan said, his voice steady and certain. "I care about you. I have cared about you since the first time I saw you hanging laundry with the sun in your hair, looking like you were carrying the weight of the world. I care about your strength and your kindness and the way you refuse to let your father's sins define you. If people want to judge, let them. I know who you are. Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time they were not born of pain. I care about you too, she whispered, so much it scares me. Then let it scare us both. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. But do not let it stop us. When he kissed her, it was gentle and careful, a question more than a demand. Tabitha answered by rising on her toes and kissing him back, pouring all her hope and fear and longing into that single point of contact. When they finally parted, she was breathless, and Nathan was looking at her with such open tenderness that she felt something inside her chest crack open, letting light into spaces that had been dark for too long. They sat by the creek for hours, talking and dreaming about what the future might hold. Nathan described the house he wanted to build, modest but solid, with a big kitchen and a porch that looked out over the valley. Tabitha found herself adding details, suggesting a garden spot near the creek, imagining curtains in the windows and books on shelves. It felt dangerous to let herself dream like this, but with Nathan beside her, his hand warm in hers, it also felt possible. The ride back to South Pass City, as the sun began to set, was quiet. But it was a comfortable silence, the kind shared by two people who no longer needed words to understand each other. When they reached the boarding house, Nathan helped her down from the horse and lingered, clearly reluctant to let her go. "Can I see you again tomorrow, on your next afternoon off?" "Yes," Tabitha said, unable to stop smiling. "I would like that very much." She watched him lead his horse to the stable, then floated into the boarding house, her heart lighter than it had been in months. Mrs. Henderson took one look at her face and shook her head with a knowing smile. "Well, I guess that is that then." Over the next few weeks, Tabitha and Nathan spent every possible moment together. On her afternoons off, they rode out to the valley, and she watched as Nathan met with the landowner and finalized the purchase. She was there the day he signed the deed, saw the fierce pride and joy in his face as he held the paper that made the valley legally his. They celebrated with a simple picnic by the creek, and Nathan told her about his plans to start building the cabin next month. "I will need to hire some help," he said, lying back in the grass with his hat pulled over his eyes against the sun. "And I will need to bring in lumber from the sawmill, get some cattle purchased and moved here before winter. It will be tight, but I think I can have a basic operation going by next spring." Tabitha sat beside him, her skirt spread around her, absently braiding grass stems. "It sounds wonderful, challenging but wonderful." Nathan pushed his hat back and looked at her, his expression growing serious. "Tabitha, I need to ask you something." Her hands stilled. "All right." He sat up, taking both her hands in his. "These last few weeks have been the best of my life. Not because of the land, though I am grateful for that, but because of you. You make everything better, brighter. When I think about building that cabin, about starting this ranch, I cannot picture doing it without you there. I know it is fast. I know we have not known each other long, but out here, time moves different. We do not have the luxury of long courtships and proper formalities." "Nathan," she whispered, her heart pounding so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. "I am asking you to marry me," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I am asking you to take a chance on a cowboy with more dreams than sense, to help me build something real and lasting. I am asking you to let me give you the home you deserve, the fresh start, the place where you never have to run again. I love you, Tabitha Palmer. I think I started loving you the moment I saw you, and I will keep loving you for the rest of my life if you let me." She could not speak past the lump in her throat, could not find words adequate to express the overwhelming rush of feeling that flooded through her. So she did the only thing she could. She kissed him, wrapping her arms around his neck and holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a spinning world. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, she was crying and laughing at the same time. "Yes," she managed. "Yes, I will marry you. I love you too, Nathan, so much." He let out a whoop of joy that startled a flock of birds from a nearby tree and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. When he set her down, he pulled a simple gold band from his pocket, clearly bought from the general store in South Pass City, but to Tabitha, it was more precious than any jewel. "It is not fancy," he said as he slipped it onto her finger. "But someday, when the ranch is established, I will get you something better." "It is perfect," Tabitha said, looking at the ring through her tears. "You are perfect." They were married a week later by the circuit judge who passed through South Pass City monthly. Mrs. Henderson stood as witness, along with Charlie Watkins, who had returned from another freight run. It was a simple ceremony in the judge's office, with no family present, no church full of well-wishers. But when Nathan slipped a matching gold band onto his own finger and kissed his bride, Tabitha felt more married, more committed, more certain than any elaborate church wedding could have made her. Mrs. Henderson hosted a small dinner at the boarding house to celebrate, and the miners who had come to respect Tabitha's hard work and kindness toasted the newlyweds with surprising good cheer. Even the crusty old prospector who complained about everything raised his glass and admitted that Nathan Quentin was a lucky man. "You treat her right," he said, wagging a finger at Nathan. "She is worth 10 of most women." "I know," Nathan replied, his arm around Tabitha's waist. "And I intend to spend every day proving that I deserve her." That night, in the small room that had been Nathan's and was now theirs, Tabitha lay in her husband's arms and marveled at how completely her life had transformed. 2 months ago, she had been fleeing Green River in shame and fear, certain that her father's sins had destroyed any chance at happiness. Now she was married to a good man who loved her, who saw past her family's disgrace to the woman she truly was. It seemed impossible, like a dream from which she might wake at any moment. "What are you thinking?" Nathan asked, his voice soft in the darkness. "That I am afraid to believe this is real, that something will go wrong." He tightened his arms around her. "Nothing is going to go wrong. We are going to build a life together, a good life. And whatever challenges come, we will face them together." "Together," Tabitha echoed, letting the words sink in. She had been alone for so long, carrying her burdens without help, that the concept of partnership felt foreign but deeply appealing. "I like the sound of that." "So do I, Mrs. Quentin." She smiled at the new name, at the fresh identity that replaced the one that had been tainted by scandal. Tabitha Quentin. It felt like redemption, like grace she had not earned but was being offered anyway. The next morning, Nathan and Tabitha began the work of building their future. Nathan had already hired 2 men from the mining camp to help with the cabin construction, and they started hauling logs and materials to the valley. Tabitha continued working at the boarding house for the time being, saving every penny to contribute to their new home. Mrs. Henderson was sorry to lose her but understanding, and she promised to spread the word that the Quentins would be starting a ranch and were honest folks worth doing business with. Every evening, Nathan returned to the boarding house with updates on the cabin's progress, his enthusiasm infectious. The foundation was laid, the walls were rising, the roof beams were in place. Tabitha helped when she could, spending her days off at the building site, learning to chink logs and mix mortar. It was hard, exhausting work, but there was profound satisfaction in watching the cabin take shape. knowing that every nail driven and every log fitted brought them closer to having a real home. In late August, nearly 4 months after Tabitha had fled Green River, the cabin was finished. It was modest, just 3 rooms, but it was solid and well built. With a stone fireplace Nathan had labored over for 2 weeks and real glass windows that caught the morning light. Tabitha stood in the doorway that first day, looking at the empty space that was now theirs, and felt tears prick her eyes. "It is not much yet," Nathan said, coming to stand behind her, "but we will make it a home." "It already is," Tabitha whispered. "It is already home." They moved in with the few possessions they owned between them. Tabitha's trunk with her mother's dress and Bible, Nathan's saddle and tools, a table and chairs bought from a miner who was leaving the territory, bedding and cookware and all the basic necessities. It was sparse, but it was theirs, built with their own hands on their own land. The first night in the cabin, they lay in bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the countryside. An owl hooted in the distance. The creek burbled over its rocky bed. The wind sighed through the pines on the ridges. It was peaceful and a little lonely, so different from the crowded boarding house where other voices and footsteps had always been audible through the thin walls. "Are you all right?" Nathan asked, sensing her tension. "I think so. It is just strange being so far from other people." "We can go back to town whenever you want. It is not that far." "No, I like it," Tabitha said slowly, sorting through her feelings. "It is just different, but good different. Like we are really starting fresh, away from everything." That was the idea. Nathan pulled her closer. "Though I have to admit, I am going to miss Mrs. Henderson's cooking. You never told me you learned to cook from church socials, not from actually cooking regularly." Tabitha laughed, swatting his chest. "I never claimed to be a great cook, but I will learn. You will not starve, I promise." "I know. And I will teach you to rope and ride properly. By this time next year you will be able to handle cattle with the best of them." It became their pattern, teaching each other the skills they lacked. Nathan was patient as Tabitha learned to manage the wood stove, to bake bread that did not turn out dense as bricks, to fry meat without burning it. She was less patient with herself, frustrated by failures that Nathan merely laughed off. But gradually, through trial and error, she improved. In turn, Tabitha taught Nathan to read and write better. He had learned the basics as a child but had little formal education. She brought out her mother's Bible and used it as a textbook. And in the evenings by lamplight, Nathan would labor over the verses, his brow furrowed in concentration as he sounded out words. When he finally read an entire chapter without help, his pride was palpable, and Tabitha kissed him in congratulation. "Why did you never go to school?" she asked one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "My father did not believe in it. Said book learning made a man weak, that the only things worth knowing were how to work and how to fight. My mother taught me a little in secret, but after she died, there was no one." He was quiet for a moment. "I used to be ashamed of it, how little I knew, but you never make me feel stupid." "Because you are not stupid. You are one of the smartest men I have ever known. You built this cabin, you understand animals and land in ways I never will. Reading and writing are just different skills. Still, I am glad to be learning. When we have children someday, I want to be able to help them with their schoolwork, to read them stories." The mention of children made Tabitha's heart skip. They had not talked much about that possibility, though it seemed inevitable. She tried to imagine a child with Nathan's gray eyes and her dark hair, running through the valley, growing up free from shame and scandal. "I hope we have children," she said softly. "I hope we have lots of them." Nathan reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "We will. We have got time and a good place to raise a family. Everything is going to work out, Tabitha. I can feel it. September brought the first real test of their resolve. Nathan purchased 20 head of cattle from a rancher willing to sell breeding stock, and the animals arrived dusty and ornery after being driven across country. Managing them required skills Tabitha was still learning, and the first week was chaos. Cattle escaped the makeshift corral Nathan had built. One ornery cow charged Tabitha while she was trying to feed them, sending her scrambling over the fence. A bull got into the garden she had been carefully tending and trampled half her vegetables. "I hate cows," Tabitha announced one evening, covered in dust and exhausted. "I hate them with a passion I did not know I possessed." Nathan tried to hide his smile and failed. "They are just animals. You will get used to them." "I will not. They are stupid and mean, and they smell terrible." "That is all true," Nathan agreed, pulling her into his arms despite her dusty state. "But they are also our livelihood, and you are doing better than you think. Today you managed to get them into the corral without any help. After it took me 2 hours and I fell in the creek." Details. He kissed her forehead. "You are tough, Tabitha Quentin, tougher than you give yourself credit for." She leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. It was true that ranch life was harder than anything she had experienced before, but there was also a freedom in it that she had never known. No one was judging her here, no one whispering about her father's crimes. She was simply Nathan Quentin's wife, a woman building a life through honest work. That identity felt clean in a way nothing had since her father's betrayal. By October, they had settled into a routine. The cabin was more comfortable now, with curtains Tabitha had sewn and a rug Nathan had bought from a traveling peddler. She had managed to salvage some of the garden, putting up preserves for the winter. Nathan had built a proper barn and corrals, and the cattle were settling into their new home. They made occasional trips to South Pass City for supplies, and Tabitha renewed her friendship with Mrs. Henderson, who delighted in hearing about ranch life and insisted on sending them home with jars of her famous pickles. It was on one of these trips that trouble found them again. Tabitha was in the general store, examining fabric, when she felt someone staring at her. She looked up and saw Robert Carson across the store, his expression ugly with malice. Her stomach clenched, but she forced herself to remain calm. She was not alone and helpless as she had been before. She was married now, protected, and Carson had no power over her. But Carson clearly did not see it that way. He approached her with deliberate menace, backing her against the fabric display. Well, the Reverend's daughter has done well for herself. Managed to trick some fool cowboy into marrying you." "My husband did not need to be tricked into anything," Tabitha said, keeping her voice steady. "Now, if you will excuse me." "Not so fast." Carson leaned in close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "I have been thinking about you, about how you ran off with all that information about your daddy's thieving. I bet there are folks back in Green River who would pay good money to know where you ended up. Maybe even folks who think you should answer for his crimes." Fear spiked through her, but before she could respond, Nathan's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Step away from my wife." Carson turned, his face flushing with anger. "This is between me and her." "No, it is not." Nathan moved to stand beside Tabitha, his hand settling protectively on her back. "My wife has done nothing wrong, and you are going to stop harassing her." "Or what? You are going to defend the honor of a thief's daughter. Do you even know what her daddy did?" "He stole from widows and orphans, gambled away money that was supposed to feed hungry kids, and she expects everyone to believe she did not know nothing about it." "I believe her," Nathan said flatly. "That is all that matters. Now you have got 2 choices. You can walk away and leave us alone, or we can take this outside and settle it another way." Several other people in the store had stopped to watch the confrontation. The storekeeper was edging toward where he kept a shotgun beneath the counter. Tabitha could feel the weight of judgment in the air, could see the curiosity and suspicion in the watching faces. All the security she had been building over the past months suddenly felt fragile as glass. Carson seemed to be weighing his options, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. Finally, he spat on the floor near Tabitha's feet and stalked toward the door. But he paused in the doorway, turning back with a sneer. "You have not heard the last of this. There is people back in Green River who would be real interested to know where Tabitha Palmer ended up. Real interested." Then he was gone, and Tabitha was left shaking, humiliated by the scene and terrified by the threat. Nathan paid for their supplies quickly and guided her out of the store, his jaw tight with anger. They rode back to the ranch in silence, and it was not until they were safely inside their cabin that Tabitha let herself break down. "He is going to tell people," she sobbed, collapsing onto a chair. "He is going to spread the story and everyone will know, and they will treat you differently because of me." "Let them," Nathan said fiercely, kneeling in front of her and taking her hands. "Tabitha, listen to me. I do not care what Robert Carson says or what anyone thinks. You are my wife, and I am proud of that, proud of you. If people want to judge you for your father's actions, that is their moral failing, not yours. But it will hurt the ranch. People will not want to do business with us. Then we will do business with people who have sense and decency. We will find a way." He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You cannot let men like Carson make you feel ashamed of who you are. You are good and honest, and you have worked so hard to build a new life. I will not let anyone take that away from you, do you hear me? I will not let them win." His fierce protectiveness broke through her panic, reminding her that she was not alone in this fight. She had Nathan now, a partner who would stand with her against whatever came. The thought steadied her, gave her the strength to push back against the fear. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I am sorry that my past keeps causing problems. Your past is part of what made you who you are. I would not change it even if I could." Nathan pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "We are going to get through this, Tabitha, together. That is what marriage means." Over the following weeks, they waited for the fallout from Carson's threats. Tabitha was tense every time they went to town, expecting whispers and pointed fingers. But to her surprise, nothing happened. Mrs. Henderson pulled her aside during one visit and assured her that she had spread the word about what Carson had done, about his harassment and threats, and that most decent people in South Pass City had no patience for a man who would bully a woman. "You have friends here, Mrs. Henderson said firmly. "More than you know. That Carson fellow has a bad reputation anyway. No one takes him seriously." It was not complete absolution, and Tabitha knew there were still people who whispered about the minister's daughter, but she began to realize that Nathan had been right. The opinions of small-minded people did not have to define her. She had built something real through her own efforts, had proved her worth through hard work and honest living. That was what mattered. Winter came to the valley with startling swiftness. By November, snow was falling regularly, blanketing the landscape in white and transforming the ranch into a pristine wonderland. The cattle huddled together for warmth, and Nathan spent long hours ensuring they had access to feed and unfrozen water. Tabitha learned to manage the cabin's warmth, keeping the fire going constantly and cooking hearty stews that would sustain them through the long, cold evenings. It was a hard winter, but also an intimate one. Snowed in for days at a time, Tabitha and Nathan developed a deep companionship that went beyond romance. They talked for hours, sharing stories from their pasts, dreams for the future. Nathan taught Tabitha to play cards and checkers to pass the time. She read to him from the few books they owned, and he listened with the attention of a man hungry for stories. They made love frequently, their physical connection deepening as they learned each other's bodies and preferences. On a particularly cold January evening, as the wind howled outside and snow piled against the windows, Tabitha made an announcement that would change everything. "I think I am pregnant." Nathan, who had been adding wood to the fire, froze mid-motion. He turned slowly, his expression stunned. "You think? Are you sure?" "Not completely sure, but my monthly is late and I have been feeling sick in the mornings. It could be other things, but—" She trailed off, watching his face anxiously, unsure how he would react. For a long moment, Nathan just stared at her. Then a smile broke across his face, so bright and joyful that it transformed him. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her in a circle. "A baby," he breathed, setting her down gently as if she might break. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Tabitha asked, though the answer was written all over his face. "Happy? Tabitha, I am more than happy. I am. I do not even have words for what I am." He placed his hand over her still flat stomach with wonder. "A child, our child. When? How long?" "If I am right, sometime in late summer. August or September, maybe," Nathan laughed, a sound of pure joy. "A summer baby, born right here in this valley. God, Tabitha, do you know what this means? We are going to be parents. We are going to have a family." She had been nervous about telling him, worried that a baby might be too much, too soon, given their still precarious financial situation. But seeing his unrestrained happiness dissolved her fears. This was what they both wanted, what they had been building toward. A family, a legacy, something permanent and good to replace the broken pieces of their pasts. As winter slowly gave way to spring, Tabitha's pregnancy became undeniable. Her body changed, swelling and shifting in ways that were both frightening and miraculous. Nathan was alternately protective and excited, fussing over her constantly and talking to her belly as if the baby could already hear him. He made plans for expanding the cabin, adding a room for the baby, and began building a cradle from smooth pine wood during the long evenings. In April, as the snow melted and the valley came alive with wildflowers, Nathan rode to South Pass City and returned with a surprise. A young woman named Sarah, the daughter of one of the miners, who had experience with birthing and was willing to come stay at the ranch as Tabitha's time approached. "I know you probably wanted a proper doctor," Nathan said, helping Sarah down from the wagon. "But the nearest doctor is 3 days' ride from here. Sarah has helped deliver a dozen babies and comes highly recommended. Mrs. Henderson vouched for her." Tabitha met Sarah, a capable woman in her mid-20s with a no-nonsense manner and kind eyes, and felt immediately reassured. They spent the afternoon discussing what to expect, what preparations to make, and Sarah promised to return in late July to stay until after the baby arrived. As summer arrived and Tabitha grew large with child, she found herself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. A year ago, she had been fleeing Green River in shame, certain that her life was ruined beyond repair. Now she was standing in her own home on her own land, carrying a child with a man who loved her unconditionally. The transformation seemed impossible, a gift she had not earned but treasured nonetheless. "You ever regret it?" she asked Nathan one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. "Marrying me, taking on all my complications." Nathan looked at her as if she had asked him whether he regretted breathing. "Not for a single second." "Tabitha, you are the best thing that has ever happened to me. You and this baby, this life we have built, it is everything I ever wanted and more than I thought I deserved." "You deserve everything good," Tabitha said, taking his hand. "You are the best man I have ever known." "Then we are both lucky," Nathan said, leaning over to kiss her. "We found each other when we both needed finding. That is not luck. That is grace." In late August, as Tabitha entered her final month of pregnancy, Sarah arrived as promised. The cabin was ready, the cradle finished and lined with soft blankets. Nathan had stocked extra supplies and made sure everything was in order. Now, all they could do was wait. The labor started on a hot afternoon in early September. Tabitha was hanging laundry when the first contraction hit, doubling her over with its intensity. Sarah took charge immediately, getting her inside and settled while Nathan paced the cabin like a caged animal, unable to help but unable to leave. "This is normal," Sarah kept assuring them both as the labor progressed through the afternoon and into the evening. "First babies take time. She is doing fine." But to Tabitha, it did not feel fine. The pain was beyond anything she had imagined, waves of agony that left her gasping and crying. She gripped Nathan's hand so hard she was sure she was breaking bones, but he never complained, never left her side. He wiped her face with cool cloths, whispered encouragement, and reminded her to breathe when the contractions threatened to overwhelm her. "You can do this," he said over and over. "You are the strongest person I know. You can do this." It was near midnight when the baby finally arrived, entering the world with a loud wail that brought tears to everyone's eyes. Sarah worked quickly, cleaning the infant and wrapping it in a blanket before placing it in Tabitha's arms. "You have a son," she announced with a smile. "A healthy, strong boy." Tabitha looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and perfect, and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. This was her son, hers and Nathan's, a living symbol of their love and their future. She had created life, had brought something good and pure into the world despite all her own imperfections. "He is beautiful," Nathan whispered, leaning over to study his son with awe. "He is perfect, Tabitha." "What should we name him?" Tabitha asked, unable to look away from the baby's face. Nathan was quiet for a moment, thinking. "What was your mother's maiden name?" "Sullivan." "Why? Sullivan is a good, strong name. What do you think of Thomas Sullivan Quentin? We could call him Thomas after no one in particular, just because it is a good name, a fresh start for a new generation." Tabitha tested the name silently and found she liked it. Thomas Sullivan Quentin. It was solid and respectable, a name that carried no taint of scandal or shame. "I think it is perfect." Little Thomas proved to be a healthy, hungry baby who kept his parents up at all hours. Those first weeks were exhausting, a blur of feeding and changing and learning how to care for an infant. But they were also magical. Nathan was a devoted father, taking his turn walking the floor with a crying baby, changing diapers without complaint, singing lullabies in his rough voice that somehow always seemed to soothe Thomas. Watching him with their son, Tabitha fell in love with her husband all over again. This was the man she had chosen, the man who had seen past her shame to the person she truly was, and every day he proved that her trust had been well placed. As autumn painted the valley in shades of gold and red, the small family settled into a routine. The ranch was doing well enough that Nathan was able to hire a hand to help with the cattle, a young man named Jacob, who was eager to learn ranching. This gave Nathan more time to spend with Tabitha and Thomas, and the three of them would often sit on the porch in the evening, watching the sun set while Thomas nursed or slept in his mother's arms. "I wish my mother could see him," Tabitha said one evening, stroking Thomas's downy head. "She would have loved being a grandmother." "Tell me about her," Nathan encouraged. "What was she like?" Tabitha smiled, remembering. "She was gentle and patient, always seeing the best in people." She used to say that grace was not just something God gave us, but something we had to give each other. I did not understand what she meant when I was young, but I think I do now. She sounds like she was a good woman. I am sorry I never got to meet her." "She would have liked you," Tabitha said with certainty. "She always said that a man's character showed in how he treated people who could not do anything for him. You are kind to everyone, Nathan, even when you do not have to be." "I learned that from you," Nathan said, surprising her. "Watching you at the boarding house, how you treated the minors with respect even when they were difficult. How you never made me feel less than because I could not read well. You taught me that kindness is not weakness, it is strength." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged, Thomas sleeping peacefully between them. Tabitha thought about how far they had both come, the wounds they had carried and were slowly healing. Their love had not fixed everything. She was still sometimes haunted by her father's betrayal, still occasionally woke from nightmares about being exposed and condemned. But Nathan's steady presence gave her the courage to face those fears, to believe that her past did not have to dictate her future. The year turned, bringing 1879 and new challenges. The winter was harsh, testing their supplies and endurance. Thomas suffered through colds that terrified his parents but ultimately passed. The cattle struggled in the deep snow, and Nathan worked himself to exhaustion keeping them alive. Money was tight, tighter than they wanted to admit, and there were nights when Tabitha lay awake worrying about whether they would make it through until spring. But they did make it, through determination and hard work, and the help of neighbors who had come to respect the young couple building a life in the valley. When spring finally arrived, green and glorious, the ranch was still standing, the cattle had survived, and little Thomas was growing strong and healthy. In April, Nathan made a trip to South Pass City to sell some cattle and returned with news that made Tabitha's blood run cold. Robert Carson had been found dead in a mining accident, crushed by a cave-in. While she could not muster grief for a man who had threatened and harassed her, his death brought complicated feelings. He had been one of the last links to her past in Green River, and with him gone, she felt both relieved and strangely unmoored. "Does that make me a terrible person?" she asked Nathan that evening. "That I am glad he is gone?" "No," Nathan said firmly. "It makes you human. He tried to hurt you, tried to use your past as a weapon. You are allowed to feel relief that he cannot do that anymore." "I suppose you are right. It is just strange to think that now there is no one left who connects me to Green River. It is like that part of my life never existed." "Maybe that is not such a bad thing," Nathan suggested. "Maybe it is time to let it go completely, to stop defining yourself by what happened there." It was easier said than done, but Tabitha tried. She focused on the present, on the life she was actively building rather than the one that had been taken from her. She threw herself into improving the ranch, planting a larger garden, learning to preserve more food for the winter. She began teaching Thomas his letters, even though he was barely 2 years old, delighting in his quick mind and curiosity. She even started writing down their family stories, wanting to create a record for future generations. In the summer of 1880, Tabitha discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news brought no anxiety, only joy. They knew what to expect now, felt confident in their ability to care for another child. Nathan built an addition onto the cabin, creating a proper bedroom for Thomas and planning for more children to come. The ranch was finally turning a profit, enough that they could afford small luxuries, and were beginning to save for the future. Their daughter arrived in March of 1881, on a day when the first wildflowers were pushing through the last of the snow. The labor was shorter this time, and Sarah, who had become a close friend, delivered another healthy baby. "A girl," she announced, placing the squalling infant in Tabitha's arms. "And she has got a set of lungs on her." "Grace," Tabitha said immediately, looking at her daughter. "We should call her Grace." Nathan, who was holding a curious Thomas and trying to keep him from climbing onto the bed, nodded in agreement. "Grace Sullivan Quentin. It is perfect." As Tabitha held her daughter, with her son peering at his new sister with wide eyes and her husband beaming with pride, she felt a profound sense of completion. This was redemption, she realized. Not in some grand gesture or public vindication, but in the quiet accumulation of days filled with love and purpose. She had fled her town in disgrace, but she had found forgiveness, first in Nathan's eyes and then gradually in her own heart. The years that followed were marked by both challenges and triumphs. The ranch grew, and Nathan's reputation as a fair and skilled rancher spread. They were able to buy more land, expanding their operation until they employed several hands and ran significant cattle. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic boy who idolized his father and followed him everywhere. Grace was spirited and fearless, climbing trees and chasing chickens with equal enthusiasm. In 1883, their third child arrived, another boy they named Daniel. By 1885, when their fourth child, a daughter named Martha, was born, the Quentin family was well established in the valley. The cabin had been expanded multiple times, becoming a proper ranch house with several bedrooms and a large kitchen. Tabitha had started a small school for the valley children, teaching reading and arithmetic in their front room 3 days a week. Nathan had been elected to the county commission, his opinion sought on matters of land use and water rights. They were respected, valued members of their community, and no one ever mentioned the scandal that had driven Tabitha from Green River years before. To their neighbors, they were simply the Quentins, a hard-working family who had built something impressive through determination and deceit. But Tabitha never forgot where she had come from or what she had overcome. On quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and she sat with Nathan on their porch, she would sometimes talk about those early days. The fear she had felt fleeing her town, the shame that had nearly crushed her, the moment she had first seen Nathan and felt a flicker of hope. "You ever wonder what would have happened if we had not met?" she asked one summer evening in 1886, when they were both in their early 30s and watching their children play in the yard. "No," Nathan said simply, "because I cannot imagine my life without you. You and these kids, this ranch, it is everything I ever wanted. Everything I never thought I would have." "I feel the same way," Tabitha said, leaning against his shoulder. "You saved me, Nathan. You gave me a second chance when I thought my life was over." "You saved yourself," Nathan corrected gently. "You had the courage to leave, to start over, to keep going even when it was hard. I just had the good sense to recognize what an incredible woman you were and hold on tight." Tabitha smiled, knowing that the truth lay somewhere between both their perspectives. They had saved each other, really. Two broken people who had found wholeness in their union. Her father's betrayal had shattered her world, but from those shards, she had built something stronger and more beautiful than anything she had lost. She thought about the woman she had been at 22, running from Green River with nothing but a carpetbag and a heart full of fear. That woman would hardly recognize the person she had become, confident and capable, a wife and mother and teacher, a woman who had found her place in the world. The journey had been painful, but it had also been necessary. She had to lose everything to discover what truly mattered, had to be broken down to be rebuilt into someone stronger. "I am glad for all of it," she said suddenly, surprising even herself. "The pain, the shame, all of it. Because it brought me here to you, to this life. I would not change it even if I could." Nathan pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "That is grace," he said softly. "Real grace. Not just forgiveness, but redemption, taking the broken pieces and making something beautiful." As the sun set over their valley, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Tabitha felt a deep peace settle over her. She had been the disgraced minister's daughter, fleeing her town in shame. But in Nathan's forgiving eyes, in his patient love and unwavering faith, she had found redemption. She had found home. The children's laughter carried on the evening breeze as Thomas chased Grace through the wildflowers while Daniel toddled after them, and little Martha played in the dirt. It was a simple moment, ordinary in every way, but to Tabitha, it represented everything she had fought for. A family built on love rather than lies. A home created through honest work. A future unburdened by the past. Years continued to pass in the valley, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their growing family. By 1890, Thomas was 12 years old and already showing his father's gift with horses and cattle. Grace, at 9, was clever and determined, already talking about becoming a teacher like her mother. Daniel at 7 was the family peacemaker, gentle and thoughtful. Martha at 5 was still their baby, though she insisted she was quite grown up. The ranch had prospered beyond their early dreams. They employed 6 regular hands now, ran several hundred head of cattle, and had established themselves as one of the most successful operations in the region. Tabitha's little school had grown as well, and she now taught 15 children, including her own. The territorial government had offered to make it an official school with a salary, but Tabitha preferred to keep it informal, teaching in her home where she could set her own curriculum. Nathan was frequently asked for advice on ranching matters, his opinion respected throughout Wyoming territory. He had aged well, his dark hair now shot through with silver at the temples, his body still strong from years of hard work. The gray eyes that had first captured Tabitha's attention still looked at her with the same love and wonder they had shown when they first met. For Tabitha, the years had brought a confidence and peace she had never imagined possible in those dark days after her father's betrayal. She was 34 years old now, a respected member of the community, a devoted mother and wife. The shame that had once defined her was barely a memory, a wound so thoroughly healed that most days she did not think of it at all. But every once in a while, usually when she was teaching her children about honesty and integrity, she would think about her father. She had never heard from him again after he fled Green River. She did not know if he was alive or dead, if he had ever felt remorse for what he had done. For a long time, she had carried anger toward him, bitter and burning. But gradually, with Nathan's help and the passage of time, that anger had transformed into something closer to pity. Her father had thrown away everything good in his life for momentary pleasures and his own weaknesses. He had lost his daughter, his congregation, his reputation, and his sense of self. In contrast, she had lost everything and gained it all back, multiplied beyond measure. In a strange way, his betrayal had been the catalyst for her greatest blessings. If he had not stolen that money, if the scandal had not driven her from Green River, she never would have met Nathan, never would have built this beautiful life. It was a complicated kind of grace, but grace nonetheless. One afternoon in the late summer of 1891, a stranger rode into their valley. Tabitha was working in the garden with Martha when she saw the rider approaching, and something about the man's posture seemed familiar in a way that made her stomach tighten. As he drew closer, she realized with shock that she recognized him. It was Samuel Hutchins, her former fiancé from Green River. Samuel dismounted and removed his hat, looking uncomfortable and uncertain. He was still handsome in a polished way, but there was something diminished about him, a weariness in his eyes that had not been there 13 years ago. "Tabitha," he said quietly, "I hope I am not intruding. I asked in South Pass City where the Quentin Ranch was, and they directed me here." "Samuel." She set down her gardening tools, her mind racing. "This is unexpected. What brings you to Wyoming?" "I have been working as a banker in Cheyenne for the last several years. I heard your name mentioned in connection with a land transaction, and I realized it must be you. I suppose I wanted to see for myself that you were all right." Martha had run inside to fetch her father, and Nathan emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his pants. He took in the scene with a glance and came to stand beside Tabitha, his presence solid and reassuring. "This is my husband, Nathan Quentin," Tabitha said. "Nathan, this is Samuel Hutchins. We knew each other in Green River, a long time ago." The two men shook hands, measuring each other with the careful courtesy of strangers. Samuel's eyes widened slightly as he took in the ranch, the well-maintained buildings, the evidence of prosperity and success. "You have done well for yourself," he said to Tabitha. "Better than anyone back in Green River would have predicted." "What do you mean by that?" Nathan's voice was cool, protective. Samuel had the grace to look embarrassed. "I apologize. That came out wrong. What I meant was that when Tabitha left, people said terrible things, predicted she would end up destitute or worse. I am glad to see they were wrong." "Very wrong," Tabitha said, finding her voice. "I have been blessed beyond measure. But I am curious, Samuel, why come all this way just to check on me? We have not spoken in 13 years. Samuel shifted uncomfortably. "Because I owe you an apology. When the scandal broke, when my mother insisted I break our engagement, I went along with it without even speaking to you. I never gave you a chance to explain, never considered that you might be innocent. I let you face the judgment of the entire town alone because it was easier than standing up for you. You could have written me a letter years ago," Tabitha pointed out. "Why now?" "Because I got married 3 years ago to a woman my mother approved of. And last year, my wife's father was caught embezzling from his bank. The whole thing came out very publicly, and suddenly, my wife was being judged for her father's crimes, exactly the way you were. Watching what she went through, seeing how cruel people could be, made me realize what a coward I had been, how badly I had failed you." Tabitha studied the man who had once been her fiancé, the man whose rejection had hurt so deeply 13 years ago. She felt only a distant pity for him now. He had been weak when she needed strength, had chosen comfort over courage, but she had survived his weakness, had thrived because of it. "I appreciate the apology," she said finally. "Truly. But Samuel, I am not the same person I was in Green River. That life, that version of myself, it is gone. I do not carry anger toward you anymore. I suppose I should thank you in a way. If you had stood by me, if we had married, I never would have come to Wyoming. I never would have met Nathan, never would have built this life. Everything I have now, everything I am, it exists because you let me go." Samuel nodded slowly, looking at Nathan with something like envy. "You are a lucky man, Mr. Quentin." "I know," Nathan said simply, his arms sliding around Tabitha's waist. "I remind myself of that every day." After Samuel left, riding back toward South Pass City, Tabitha stood with Nathan on their porch and watched the sun set over the mountains. Martha and the other children played in the yard, their voices carrying on the evening breeze. Everything she loved was right here in this valley in this moment. "Do you ever regret it?" Nathan asked softly. "The life you might have had if things had gone differently?" Tabitha turned to look at him, at this man who had given her everything, who had seen her at her lowest and loved her anyway. "Not for a single second. The life I might have had was nothing compared to the life I do have. Samuel was safe and comfortable, but he was never brave." "You are brave, Nathan. You have the courage to love fully, to build something from nothing, to stand up for what you believe in even when it is difficult. That is the kind of man I want beside me, the kind of father I want for my children." Nathan pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I love you, Tabitha Quentin, more now than the day I married you, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." "That is grace too," Tabitha whispered. "The grace of being loved despite our flaws, of being given more than we deserve." As the stars emerged in the darkening sky, Tabitha reflected on the long journey that had brought her to this moment. She had fled her town in disgrace, carrying nothing but shame and fear. She had found work and shelter, but more importantly, she had found Nathan, a cowboy with kind eyes and a forgiving heart. He had seen past her father's sins to the woman she truly was, had offered her not just love but partnership, not just forgiveness but redemption. Together, they had built something beautiful, a ranch that supported their family and provided employment for others. 4 healthy children who were being raised with love and strong values, a community of friends and neighbors who respected them. Most importantly, they had built a marriage based on trust, honesty, and deep affection, a relationship that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. The disgraced minister's daughter no longer existed. In her place stood Tabitha Quentin, wife, mother, teacher, rancher, a woman who had claimed her own redemption through courage and hard work. The scars of her past remained, faint traces of old wounds, but they no longer defined her. Instead, they served as reminders of how far she had come, of the strength she had discovered in herself when everything else fell away. Nathan had been the catalyst for her transformation, but he had never tried to rescue or fix her. Instead, he had stood beside her, offering support while she rebuilt herself. That was the truest kind of love she had learned. Not the dramatic passion of storybooks, but the steady, unwavering presence that said without words, "I am here, I believe in you, we will face whatever comes together." As they stood together on the porch, watching their children play in the golden evening light, Tabitha felt a profound gratitude wash over her. Not just for Nathan and their children, not just for the ranch and their success, but for the entire journey that had brought her here. The pain had been real. The shame had nearly destroyed her. But from those ashes, a new life had emerged, stronger and more authentic than anything that had come before. She thought about the young woman who had walked out of Green River with nothing but a carpetbag and broken dreams, and she wanted to tell that woman that everything would be all right, that the darkness would pass and light would come again. She wanted to assure her that forgiveness was possible, that redemption was real, that love could heal even the deepest wounds. But that woman was gone now, transformed through trial and time into someone wiser and stronger. The journey had been necessary, every painful step a part of the path that led to this moment of peace. Nathan squeezed her hand, and she turned to meet his eyes, those steady gray eyes that had first offered her hope when she had none left. They had been strangers once, 2 wounded souls who had found each other in an unlikely place. Now they were partners in every sense, bound not just by love but by shared purpose and mutual respect. "What are you thinking about?" Nathan asked, reading the contemplative expression on her face. "About how far we have come, about how grateful I am for all of it, even the hard parts, about how much I love this life we have built together." "Me too," Nathan said simply. He pulled her closer, and they stood together in comfortable silence, watching the day fade into night. Inside the house, Tabitha could hear the children getting ready for bed, Martha's high voice insisting she was not tired, Thomas's patient explanation of why she needed to sleep anyway. These sounds of family, of home, were the sweetest music she had ever heard. The valley stretched before them, peaceful in the gathering darkness. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed softly. A coyote called out to the rising moon. The creek burbled over its rocky bed, the same constant sound that had welcomed them to this place years ago. This was home. Not the house she had lived in as a child, not the town that had rejected her, but this valley, this ranch, this family. She had been the disgraced minister's daughter, but she had found redemption in a forgiving cowboy's eyes. Nathan had given her the greatest gift possible, not rescue, but the space and support to rescue herself. In his steady presence, she had discovered her own strength. In his acceptance, she had learned to forgive herself. In his love, she had found the courage to build a new life from the ruins of the old. And it was a beautiful life, full of hard work and simple joys, challenges overcome and dreams fulfilled. Their children would grow up here, learning the values of honesty and courage that both their parents had fought so hard to claim. They would know nothing of shame or scandal, would be free from the burdens that had weighed so heavily on their mother. That was perhaps the greatest redemption of all, breaking the cycle, ensuring that the next generation inherited blessing rather than curse. As the last light faded from the sky and the stars blazed forth in their full glory, Tabitha leaned against her husband and felt completely at peace. The journey that had begun in disgrace had ended in grace. The flight from shame had led to honor. The loss of everything had resulted in gaining what truly mattered. She was home. She was loved. She was redeemed. And that was more than enough. It was everything.